Hello and welcome. Hi, I'm Dave. This tutorial is part of a beginner's HTML series. I'll be using the Chrome web browser, the Visual Studio Code editor, and the live server extension for Visual Studio Code to view the web page. There are links to these tools, starter code files, and all resources in the description below. Documents need organization, and our HTML files are no different. HTML achieves document organization with semantics. In this lesson, we're going to improve our code with the semantic HTML layout. Let's get started. I've got Visual Studio Code here on the left with our index.html open, and on the right, I have got our index.html page displaying, and we're using the live server extension for Visual Studio Code to display that page. And you can see it's launched down here. You can click to close or open the server. You can search for that extension over here at the extensions icon if you do not have it. Again, it's the live server extension. Okay, so we're adding semantics to our index HTML page. Now we've already added some, so let's highlight what we have done already as we've built this page out over the lessons. The main thing that we have done correctly is add a hierarchy of headers. You only want one H1 per page, and this should be an outline, much like you would have an outline for an essay or any type of paper topic you would write. So this is your title for the whole page, essentially. And from there, you can have multiple H2 headers, which is one level down in the hierarchy, and they would define subtopics. And then beneath that, you could have H3 headers if there was a subtopic of a subtopic, and so on. And that continues to H6, although you really don't want any more than about 3 levels of headings on a page. So H1, H2, H3 would be the ideal way to have a page laid out. After that, we need to consider some things about semantic HTML. Writing semantic HTML helps us quickly see or read the different sections in a web page and navigate to those sections. Now we've already added a nav element to our page, and nav elements are semantic elements. So this says we have a grouping of links here, and we can see that on the page with Learning HTML and Planning a Vacation. We have a grouping of links here that will help us navigate to the rest of the page. We also have an HR, which stands for horizontal rule. In the past, I believe I might have said these didn't really have a semantic meaning, but they do. They're currently viewed as semantic elements, and it means that there is a topic change. So something is changing, and of course we have a couple of topics on our page, and we have horizontal rules between those. In the future, as we learn CSS, we may want to remove the horizontal rules we see here that divide our navigation and our heading for the page and replace those with lines that we can create with CSS, because we're not really separating topics here, although it doesn't hurt to have these horizontal rules in place at this time. And the main thing to convey about semantic HTML is the word semantic. That means it provides meaning, as the nav element says, hey, this is a navigation area, or the H1 element says, hey, this is a heading. We can also get that from other parts of the page. We added section elements that say this is a new section. So they provide additional meaning rather than just a generic divider, and we will talk about what a generic divider is later as well. Now, in addition, semantic HTML makes our pages accessible to screen readers and other assistive technology, and that is very important as we create pages. Now, while we've added some semantic HTML already, let's add the 3 big areas that most consider for pages. The first is not a head section, but a header for our page. Now we have a heading, which is the title of the page, but we can wrap this in a header element. And there can be more than one header element per page. However, it needs to follow the heading hierarchy. So imagine if we had a social media site. Now every post, whether it would be a blog post or a post like Facebook or Instagram, every post could have its own header, and it might have a subtitle in that post as well. But this is a header now for our full page. So this would be at the top level of our page with the hierarchy here of H1, which is the heading for our page. Notice we've also included the navigation inside of our header. And we can go ahead and remove this horizontal rule, and I think it will be just fine. We don't need the semantic meaning of a changed topic there, and I think it's going to look okay without the line as well. So let's save this now, and we can see Live Server updates our page immediately, so we can see the change. And really all we see visually is that our horizontal rule is removed. However, we have added some extra meaning to our HTML here now, that this is the heading or the header section for our full page. Now the next element we want to add is the main element. Now there can only be one main element per page, and by definition that would make sense. You can only have one main area for content per page, and so we'll start here, and it's going to include our sections that we've created. So I used Control X to cut the closing main element tag, and I'll scroll down to where our second section ends before our area here at the end, and I'll paste the closing main element and save, and we can see Visual Studio Code reformatted for us. So now we've got the main element wrapping our two topic areas of vacation and of HTML. So we've added a header and a main element. Now one other thing we can add for our page is a footer. Now just like the header, there can be more than one footer per page. And that might be a footer for a blog post or a footer for a social media post. But this is the footer for our entire page in this example. Once again, Control X to cut that closing tag, and I'm going to wrap everything we have here at the end in the footer. One other thing I want to add, just because I didn't do it before, we've validated our page throughout the other lessons, and it's not an error, it's not a problem, but I want to include this information here about the copyright. I want to include that in a paragraph element. So I'm going to make sure that's lowercase. Why am I getting a capital? There we go. And then I'm going to once again cut the closing tag and put it after the content and save. It gets reformatted. It really doesn't change the look. I just wanted both inside that paragraph, and that might help in the future when we want to format this area as well with CSS. So now our document has been outlined into three major sections. We have a footer, a main area, and a header. And then inside the header, we've already discussed, we have a navigation element that is also Semantic HTML. Our list is also Semantic HTML. We know right away that this is providing a list, and this would be identified by assistive technology as well. Now there can be more than one nav element per page. So we might have a nav area in the footer. Footers often have links to other areas of a website. Now we've only got a couple of links in our footer, and one goes back to the top and the other does go to our about page. However, it's not a grouping of links where we would organize. If we had several other things here, I might consider a nav. And if you do have more than one nav element per page, it's important that they are labeled so assistive technology knows which nav is which. And here we can do that with an attribute called aria-label, and then we can set it equal to something that clearly says what it is, like primary navigation. And now we have labeled our nav as the primary navigation area. If you did include a heading in the nav element, which is not required, but if you did, you could link to that. So you could have an H2 here, and then in the H2 we might put primary navigation, if I can spell it, there we go. And now let's give this an ID, and here we'll give the ID the same value, primary navigation, and then here instead of aria we would say aria labeled by is the correct attribute here. Now we're looking at our primary navigation value, and it's saying, hey, it's labeled by this value that's in the H2. So you can link these together with an aria labeled by pointing back to the ID of a heading. However, since we're not going to have an H2 in our nav, I'll go ahead and remove that, and you can just choose the aria label attribute and set that equal to primary navigation, which is equally accessible to screen readers and other technologies. Okay, let's scroll down into this main area. Previously, we broke our topics, HTML and vacation, into sections, which are semantic HTML tags. However, there is a more appropriate tag now that we kind of have an idea of how our page is laid out, because these are areas that could be on their own. Maybe they would each have their own page, but much like a social media post or a blog post, some type of article, you might think, there is an article element. So I have highlighted this section and I'm going to type article instead, and I believe we'll find that VS Code changes our closing tag immediately. Yes, and it was already changed to article. So instead of a section, let's call this an article because it clearly has its own topic. And now let's do the same for our other section based on vacation. So we can highlight it, change it to article, and we'll verify that the closing tag is also article. And yes, it is right here. So now we have two articles instead of sections. Now there is sometimes a debate about which should be used, and it's really not clearly defined if article or section is the proper choice. They would both pass a validator check. So really the way I look at it is an article has a clear topic where a section is more generic. You might use a section just to actually create a little section in your code, whereas an article has a clear topic that the area is about. So now inside of the article, we could create other articles, but now I want to go ahead and add a couple of sections inside of our HTML article. So as our article begins, we've got the heading, which is H2, and it says, I'm ready to learn HTML. And then we have a paragraph saying, this is my first web page. That's fine. Let's go ahead and add the section after that point. And now once again, I'll press Tab to get both the opening and closing tags. I'm going to highlight the closing tag, Control X to copy it, and I'm going to bring it down here to just underneath the figure. And that's where we'll end this first section. I also want to go ahead and add a subheading here, which is an H3, and I'll just make this HTML5, as that's what the section is about. And now our section has the subheading HTML5, it has the HTML5 logo, and it has our figure that has our code sample of HTML5. That all seems related. Now let's add another section, and this is the My Daily Schedule section. So lowercase again, that's what I prefer. And so we'll have section and the closing section tag. I will cut that and I'll put it here at the end of the list before the closing article tag. So now we have two clear sections inside of our article, and they both have headings that are H3, so we're at the third tier of the heading, with the H1 being the heading for the overall page, the H2 being the heading for the article, and then the H3s being the headings for the nested sections within the article. So we're keeping our hierarchy in place. Underneath the list, we can add another element and just a little more content. Let's call this an aside. This is a semantic element, and if you think about how a web page is laid out, oftentimes you think of an aside as the sidebar to the page, but it could also just be another section of complementary text that is not as important as what's in the main section or article that you are putting it inside of. And that's what we'll do here. And then I want to use some other semantic elements just to demonstrate how they work. So now I'm going to add a details semantic element. And inside a details element, you want to add a summary element. Now the summary, if this was a product, we might just put warranty information in here as the summary. Here I'm going to put something that's more like a question, and it will display how the details and summary work. So I'm going to say, guess the number of hours I code per day as our summary. Now underneath we can put the answer to this question, and now I'm going to put, I start at 8 a.m. and I write code for, let's say, 3 hours every morning. And we can save that. I'll scroll up so we have it up here towards the middle of our page. And now let's scroll up here and let's look at what we have on the page, because the rest of our semantic changes really didn't change the appearance here. But this, where we added this new content, notice we're not seeing this paragraph at this point. We just see guess the number of hours I code per day, but it has this little arrow next to it. If we click on this, then we see the answer. So that's a nice little addition that this HTML element adds. And again, these are all semantic elements. So the aside has some meaning, that it's complementary text. It's not as important as what's in the rest of the article. The details and the summary work together. So this could, once again, provide details about a product, say warranty information, something else, a return policy, whatever. But you could also use it kind of as a quiz here, where you have a question and an answer. Let's go ahead and add just a couple of more semantic elements to this. One is what we can do with a highlighter. Just like you might use a highlighter on a piece of paper, there is an element called mark. So I'm going to mark what I want to highlight here in the text. And by including it in the text, you know it's an inline element and not a block element. So now if I save that, we have highlighted number of hours. Now inside the answer, we're looking at some time here. We have 8 a.m. and we also have a duration of 3 hours. We can add some meaning to that in the text as well, and we can provide a time element. Then we need a date time attribute. And for the date time attribute value, I want to put in the actual hours. It accepts several values. So this would be 0800 on a 24-hour clock. And now let's put the closing time element after the 8 a.m. here. And notice if I save this right now and show this, it does not change what 8 a.m. looks like at all. But once again, it provides meaning in our HTML for technologies that are reading it, especially those assistive technologies. But it could also provide some meaning for the browser itself. Now also it says, as I write code for 3 hours, we can provide a time element for the duration too. So we have time, once again with the date time attribute, and now we'll put in a different value because there is a value for duration. Going to put this closing tag at the end of the 3 hours. Now let's look at the value for duration. We would put in PT3H. And remember, there is a link in all of the HTML resources that I link to in the description. There is a link that shows all of the HTML elements. So you can look up, for example, the time element on the Mozilla Developer Network. That's the MDN site. And you can look at all the values that could be accepted for the date time attribute. Okay, let's save this and move down to our vacation area where we also want to add 2 sections. I think these are clearly defined already, where we have subheadings for places I'd like to visit, and really we have a subheading for places I don't want to visit, I believe. So here, let's go ahead and add a section, again lowercase, and I'll take that closing section tag, highlight it, Control X to cut. I'll scroll down here and we'll add that before the next subheading. So there we go, and save that, and of course it reformats again. Now I'll add a section element and put the closing after we finish our places I want to avoid section. And that would be at the end of our description list, and we can save that. Now we've got 2 sections inside of this article as well. And really, once again, it doesn't change the look, but it does change how the browser interprets, and it definitely adds a benefit for assistive technology. Now, before we look at our document outline with these changes, I want to quickly discuss, and I'll just do it here by this comment where it says add more places, 2 different elements that you want to avoid as you're learning HTML, and then later on, you can use them as we possibly get into them with CSS, but there is a div, and in older HTML code you will see divs everywhere. Sometimes you still do when those people that have been using divs are used to still writing them and they just continue what they've been doing in the past. However, there is no semantic meaning to a div. Think of a div much like a section without the semantic meaning. It just stands for divider. And really you can put them anywhere, but if you do, you really have to do a lot of work to get them to convey meaning. You have to add additional attributes that help assistive technology interpret these elements because they have no meaning as is. They are block elements. So a very similar element that is an inline element, if we just wanted to wrap a word or two in a paragraph in an element, is span. We'll definitely use some spans as we learn CSS. However, once again, they have no meaning whatsoever by themselves. They don't change or add any value to your code, and we would use them possibly to apply some CSS styling to some words that we would highlight around span. So we really want to avoid both of these elements as you learn HTML. Really work on using semantic elements, and then when you understand what semantic elements are and how to use them, and then occasionally when just no semantic element is the correct choice, that is the time that we actually should use divs and spans. So I'm going to delete those for now and save our document. And now I'll just scroll our code up to the very top, and I'm going to do the same for our page over here on the right. Now what I want to bring your attention to, I'm going to maximize the browser, and we're going to go to the Chrome Web Store and look at an extension we can add, and that extension is HTML5 Outliner. So search for that. You'll find HTML5 Outliner. You can click on that, and I've got it installed already, so mine says remove from Chrome. Yours would probably say install here, and it will look at our semantic elements and make an outline of our page. So let's check that out. Okay, I'm going to bring our page back down to the size we had it. Bring it down here to the bottom. Now once you've got that extension installed, you may have to restart your version of Chrome to get it to work, but here we go. Click on HTML5 Outliner, and look, we have got an outline of our current page. So we've got our heading hierarchy correct with my goals for the year. An untitled nav, that's okay. We didn't put a heading in there. Like I said, we could have put an H2. It's just saying we didn't have one, but a nav doesn't require one. But remember, if you do have more than one nav element per page, then you do need to at least appropriately label that for assistive technology. Okay, now we've got another section. This is our article. I'm ready to learn HTML, and that's our H2 heading. Inside the article, remember, we have two sections. We have the HTML5 and my daily schedule, and then we have an aside, and this aside was inside the second section. It's also untitled, which is okay. An aside does not have to have a heading, but it just notes that as it's untitled here. If you added a heading inside of the aside, say an H4, then it would of course appear there. Now we've got our other section, our other article actually, this I am also planning a vacation. That was an H2. And then these are H3 headings. So you can see how important the headings are. The heading hierarchy, if you don't get any other semantics correct in your page, that's the one thing to really understand, is the heading hierarchy of a page. But all of these other semantic elements definitely help outline your page and add meaning. Avoiding these is the biggest mistake you can possibly make as you are constructing an HTML page. Okay, now that we've looked at our outline, let's once again validate our page. I'll pull this over just so we see a little bit better. I'll click File Upload. We're at validator.w3.org. And I'm going to click Choose File. I have to make sure I'm in the right lesson folder. I am not, so I need to go into HTML course, lesson 7, index.html. Just make sure you upload the index.html you were working on for this lesson. Click check, and we'll see if we have any problems. If you have a problem, it will show here. It should tell you what line and what the problem is. But we're good to go. Document checking completed. No errors or warnings to show. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection. And a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you. And thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.